So in the modern era, if I told you a player played 1,000 games, skated in 9 Stanley Cups for two teams, won five, and was considered one of the best players of his era, not in the NHL Hall of Fame, you're going to say, well, how come? Well, there's been some argument over the years, and I just want you to put this in perspective. Who was one of the best defensive players of the 1960s and 70s? Well, Davy Keon comes to mind, but someone right up there with the defensive style was Jimmy or Jim Roberts, one of the key players in the Montreal Canadiens and St. Louis Blues dynasties of the 60s and 70s, because after he was drafted by St. Louis in the 67 expansion draft, he helped the team to three straight Stanley Cup finals, two against Montreal, one against Boston. Individually, he won uh, five cups with Montreal, played in the 67 team that lost to Toronto. But I just want you to listen to some of the stats and some of the legend of Jimmy Roberts. Now, Jimmy Roberts was born in 1940, James Wilfred Roberts. Um, he had played for a Montreal Canadiens kind of a sub affiliate called the Peterborough Petes, the OHA. Now, he was signed by the Canadiens and turned pro with the Montreal Royals minor league team in 1959. After several years in the minors, he saw his first NHL action in the 64 season with Montreal and remained there for the next several seasons, winning two Stanley Cups before becoming the first round selection of St. Louis in the 67 expansion draft. Now, the best described Jimmy Roberts' style very similar to Doug Jarvis, Bob Gainey, Guy Carbonneau, the Montreal defensive style, Joe Tremblay. Would very rarely make a mistake. Very good in the corners. Very good hand manning the puck. Used to play on the shorthand to help Montreal. Him and Jacques Laperriere were kind of the quarterbacks of the penalty kill back in the day. Also, you look at Joe Tremblay, the work they done as well. So for what he was asked to do, he could do it perfectly, and it led to a career that went much longer and much bigger than everybody expected, because he was just considered a top four, top five prospect, even with the old Cleveland Barons, the Montreal affiliate. Now we're talking about he went over to St. Louis. He played some strong hockey for the Blues over five seasons, and he was also named team captain 71 before he was traded back to Montreal, where Montreal needed him again for his defensive stalwart. I think they had to look at certain players in their system to play defense, and he said, "Well, if Jimmy Roberts is available, maybe it's time for him to come back," and that's what happened. Now, he would play mostly on the Gainey line, whoever Gainey was playing with, sometimes Risebrough, sometimes Murray Wilson, sometimes Doug Jarvis, before Jarvis moved up. Later on, Rick Chartrand and some other strong defensive players would take Robert's style and make it their own. But it was typical Saturday night when Montreal was at 7-1. Roberts, Gainey, and Jarvis would get a lot of ice time, and in many cases, Roberts had pretty well, stopped any type of effort by the opposing team, especially Boston. Very good against Boston. I remember a lot of games where Boston was trying to tie up the match or go ahead, and Roberts held the fort for Montreal. And again, he got a lot of ice time. And very nondescript player. You didn't think he was doing anything. All of a sudden, it'd be a tough pass or the goal. It would be a goal in. Now, after some again great seasons with Montreal, he rejoined the Blues for one final season in '78 before going into retirement. Now, the word shadow, Jimmy Roberts was best described as a shadow, but not only a shadow for the first line players, for the second line players. One of the Flyers announcers said, the reason why Flyers are not doing too well in the '76 final and later on in the regular season is because Roberts basically, was just following like Dave Keon did or Tremblay. He knew his role, he knew how to do it, and he allowed Montreal and St. Louis to hold down the goals. Now after his retirement as a player, Roberts hooked back up with Bowman. He was the interim coach of the Sabres for a little while before taking on the coaching duties of the Springfield Indians of the AHL, where he won back-to-back Calder Cups in 1991. After which he was named to be the head coach of the Hartford Whalers. Uh, Again, after a short stint there, he went to be the coach and general manager of the Worcester Ice Cats of the AHL for 2 seasons before moving on to be the assistant coach with St. Louis between 96 and 2000. And he was also interim head coach in 1997. Now, he's one of only a few hundred players to play 100 NHL games. He counted a very important, in my view, 126 goals and 200 assists for about 320 points. And he played in 3 All-Star games in 65, 69, 70s. And again, he's engraved on the cup for 5 times. And unfortunately, Roberts, like many NHLers, had a rough end to his life. He had contracted cancer and died on October 23rd, 2015, after giving literally a half century to the sport he loved. Now, 2015, the Blues had a special tribute to Roberts by wearing the decals. Um, for their home games that read JR in the lower left corner of their helmet. But a lot of people that colleagues I know work for the Gazette, the Montreal papers, La Presse, Jimmy Roberts was just so important to the Montreal Canadiens, the St. Louis Blues. Get you 10 or 15 goals, but he could be rough when he needs to be. But a lot of the goals he scored in the playoffs, were added addition because he was holding the best players of the other team to assist their goal a game, and when he get like 1 or 2 points, was very very important. But it's so ironic that his best season with Montreal was probably the year that he didn't need him, 1973, where Montreal had probably their best offense of the decade. That's the year of Cornway and Peter and Frank Mahovich and Guy Lafleur and everybody else. That year he had 32 points, including 14 goals, which was an amazing, to me, it was an amazing total. Because every time Roberts got a goal, it meant something, and he meant a lot to his players, I think. So if you ever have a chance, go on YouTube, see some of the old Montreal Canadiens games, especially when Montreal was playing Red Army back in the day. Roberts was a factor in those games. He was a factor in the playoffs. But again, like I said, very good on the road. Like at home, he gets maybe less shifts, but Bowman trusted him on the road because he would very rarely, make a major mistake. And I talked in the previous podcast about Jacques Laperriere. I'm going to do a future one of Joe Tremblay. There's been enough great scores in Montreal history we all remember. But if I told you there's a guy that's not in the Hall of Fame with 5 cups, nine final appearances, head coach for 3 teams, a dedicated individual to hockey for literally, almost 60 years. It's. I think Jimmy Roberts should be put in the Hall of Fame. If Guy Carbonneau was in there, I know there's other Montreal Canadiens like Ralph Backstrom have 5 or 6 cups, but the two biggest problems in the Hockey Hall of Fame, players like Roberts and players like Paul Henderson never get to that level. They've done either well as international or done well as a what they call a stay-at-home guy. But like I said, Claude Provost's in there, so why not Jimmy Roberts? I think Jimmy Roberts deserves to be in the Hall of Fame, in my personal opinion. But that's just me. So again, on this COVID Monday, this has been a defensive look at some of the Montreal Canadiens players. Again, future ones include like Jules Tremblay and also maybe Jacques Plante, because I want to talk about the Jacques Plante trade out of Montreal. That itself was not as heavy as Patrick Waugh, but just as detrimental to the Montreal Canadiens. So, hope this finds you well. Have a good, happy evening.